anytime there's any kind of altercation, and even in cases of self-defense, which obviously you have a legal right to defend yourself, if there is a weapon involved, even though you're lawfully able to carry certain weapons, almost always that person gets charged. It seemed like the first thing they went off was the level of injury, which grams were visible. You know, there were cuts, so there's blood, and you know, everybody gets, I think, a little bit excited about, you know, gore. So they kind of picked their victim, and then the investigation sort of went down that pathway. They didn't really do a very good job investigating a possible claim of self-defense. Statements were taken from witnesses who supported Mr. Harper's version and not our client's. And then when Jared was interviewed by police, you know, again, he was cooperative, he was upset. He told them it was self-defense, that he was afraid for his life, and somehow that entire interview was not recorded or captured on audio when all the other witnesses there were audio taped when they spoke with police.
My name is Zach Wagner. I am a criminal defense attorney. I've been practicing criminal defense for about 5 years. Prior to that, I was a prosecuting attorney and senior prosecuting attorney at the King County Prosecutor's Office here in Seattle, Washington. And I, along with my co-counsel, Michelle Scudder, defended Jared Ha in the criminal case that had been brought by King County against him. You know, Jared was arrested after an altercation at a party, and he was immediately taken to jail. When I first met Jared, he was called by his uncle and asked to go see him, and he was brought out, and just knowing the charge that I had seen, and from my prior experience, I was not expecting to see such a nice young man like Jared sitting there, bewildered and scared. And unbeknownst to me at the time, suffering from the effects of a concussion from the beating he had taken. And, you know, over the course of time, we were able to get Jared out of jail while the case was pending, and got to know him very, very well, he and his family, and learned that, you know, Jared was legitimately trying to defend himself in this matter, and actually had undergone a very traumatic attack on the night that he was attacked by Graham Harper.
It was very unique. I mean, as I said, you know, Mr. Wagner knew the family, met Jared, introduced me to them when I came out of the case. You know, we do a lot of clients in this profession. This was completely different than any case I think either of us had handled, in that, you know, just getting to know the entire family, making decisions, running, you know, information, facts about the case through them. Just a very nice, you know, thoughtful family, very supportive and caring about Jared, who's also just a very intelligent, thoughtful young man. We had complete confidence in putting him on the stand, that he would be truthful and appear very well in front of a jury, which honestly isn't always the case in this profession. But I think we all forged a very tight-knit bond that, you know, by the time it came to trial for Zach and I mean, this was not ever about money. It was very much, we believed in our client. We knew Jared was innocent, and it just became very personal. They were family at that point.
I never see any lawyers with both of them, and they were so sincere with my son's case, and they work hard. They're the hardest lawyer in the world. I would say, even on the trial, 2.5 weeks, a little bit under 2.5 weeks. They never take lunch. They always work through lunch and go to the library, study more, and they work hard. They're the best lawyer, I think, best lawyer in Washington here, and they never talk about money. They never ask more money, and they always want to work on the case, and that's all. I mean, the money, the whole year, until we asked him. He never come up to us and say, hey, you owe me this, and it was amazing.
as the case was set for trial, and so we began preparing for the criminal trial. You know, in a self-defense case, you know, as an attorney, you essentially almost always are going to have to put your client on the stand. And that means, you know, for any just normal person, you're going to be nervous. There are issues. Some people don't come off very well. Some people, you know, you just have a lot of concerns about. One thing we did not have concerns about was we knew Jared's account of what had happened was truthful, that he came across very honest, very sympathetic. We had independent witnesses who corroborated that, which isn't always the case. You know, we just felt very strong that we were in the right, which again, as a criminal defense attorney, you don't always feel going into the courtroom, but we believed in him, which just separated this case from, again, most cases you ever try as a criminal attorney.
What I didn't quite realize from the outset was how strong of a self-defense case. It was initially portrayed, and certainly portrayed in all the media, as a situation in which Jared was attacking these girls, these women at school, and that this man had run out to protect these girls and stepped in front of them and stopped this horrible assault that Jared was committing. But it was not long after reading the police reports, even just the initial police reports, that we realized that there was a big difference between the story that Graham Harper was telling and what all the other witnesses were saying. And what became very clear very quickly was that Jared had gotten into an altercation with some individuals and gotten out of it and left the scene, and that this man, Graham Harper, who was a 240-pound bodybuilder, chased Jared down and started really, you know, beating him up very badly, including grabbing him and slamming his head into a car. And it wasn't until after that that Jared had actually used a knife to defend himself. And so once we began looking at all the witness statements, and then more importantly, re-interviewing them with the angle of trying to get the full story, we started to realize that, you know, this wasn't just a viable self-defense case. This is exactly what had happened in this instance.
So snippets of his interview were uncovered that actually showed him saying, I was afraid for my life, I was just defending myself. But none of that came out in the preliminary investigation. We just sort of stumbled upon it going through hours of audio tape from the in-car video. So it was frustrating because you felt like they just kind of picked their story and stuck with it, and anything that was inconsistent with that, they just didn't look at and dismissed. And so we dealt with that from the Seattle Police Department, then the prosecutor's office kind of just followed that line of thinking, and it was so frustrating because we did have independent witnesses who said that's not what happened.
That's one of the reasons why I didn't call the police, is because I wanted to, just go on with my life, wanted him to get on with his, and I didn't know if I could, and that's the thing. And so I was, I went home and I just wanted to wake up the next morning and everything would be okay. But up until like the bitter end, I was still in denial. Even after I was arrested, like when I was cuffed, I was like, okay, maybe I still, didn't get him. I'll just explain to the police my side of the story, and they'll see it's self-defense and let me go. Explaining to the police my side of the story, even though I knew all lawyers tell you don't talk to the police, it never helps you. But I was like, no, I was about to die. I need to tell them that. They know the law. They know self-defense. I tell them this. They seem like they're listening. They didn't actually listen too well.
The police saw it differently, but of course they jumped to a conclusion very, very quickly. It is clear that there had been an altercation that had occurred with the girls and Jared beforehand, and so they made up their minds, and they decided, okay, we know what we've got here. We've got a crazy kid with a knife, and that is how we're going to investigate this case. And you can see it just from who they decided to talk to at length, who they cut interviews short with, and who they elected not to interview even at all. So there were a couple of independent witnesses who gave a very different account, certainly from Graham Harper and even from some of the other individuals there. They had no affiliation with anyone, and they actually were with two other people. And after they first spoke to the police took a very cursory statement from them, and then decided not even to interview the other two people that really would have said the same thing. So the police had a much different view, but I think what they did is they jumped to a conclusion and had no real desire to go out and try to find what actually happened and really find the truth. And that's we even saw that in the way they handled Jared. I mean, they went out, they arrested him, they took a statement from him, but they did not record it, even though they had recording devices readily available, including in their car. They could have just brought him a little closer to the car. The officer apparently took notes, but then immediately destroyed them. And though they talked to him for about a half an hour, there was probably about 5 lines in the entire police report dedicated to the statement that he took from Jared Ha. We then later found out that a little of this interview, I guess unbeknownst to the officer, got captured on this camera that he had in his car. The audio portion at least got captured, and we could hear Jared explaining to the police that in fact he thought he was going to die, that he was just trying to save his own life. The police officer assured him that that would end up in his report, and of course it did not end up in his report. And it was fortunate enough that we actually found it. Really, honestly, the night before this police officer was going to testify and claim that Jared hadn't told him these things.
Thank God we found 4 unbiased witnesses that were walking by. We got their testimonies, they testified in trials, they spoke volumes in trial. But after all this evidence is found, and we have very compelling evidence that everyone knew about, that I was not the aggressor that night, that I, was chased down, that I was attacked, that I was beaten within an inch of my life. But still charges were against me, and no plea bargains came up until going to trial, where the prosecutor told me, Jared, I'm going to give you a plea bargain. Assault in the 3rd degree, where you're still a felon, but I'm going to push for no jail time. There's still a possibility of 0 to 90 days, but she told me she was going to push for no jail time. But if you don't accept that, Jared, and you go to trial, we're going to bump up the assault in the 2nd degree to assault in the 1st degree. And instead of looking at 5 to 7 years in jail, or in prison more actually, you'll be looking at 10 to 12 years in prison.
Tricky, it was fortuitous it did come out the way it did, because I think the jury and the judge were clearly on our side, saw the truth. The really bizarre thing about this case was that the private investigator that was hired by our team from the defense went out and actually took recorded statements from the independent witnesses early on, and they all said Mr. Harper was attacking Jared. The knife did not come out until he was actually seen slamming his head, into a car. And this is a guy, with a good 70, 80 pounds on Jared. He's huge. They all said that. We turned that all over to the prosecution early on in the hopes of saying, look, you've got it wrong. Here's, corroborating but independent witnesses. Someone, both parties had no motivation to lie, no connection with any of the parties. And what was truly bizarre, because Mr. Wagner and I both are former prosecutors, was that it did not seem to sway their position on the case. And that to this day sort of blows my mind. But I think that once we got into trial, they sort of got flogged with these facts because, they can't hide them. They came to light, and I think that was ultimately, a big turning point for us, and the jury and the judge. I think they were all on our side.
The thing is that this is a menacing looking blade to someone who isn't familiar with knives. If they never heard of a karambit, the first time they see it, they're like, oh my god. And so you have to kind of be aware that a standard prosecution practice is to show the weapon in question to the jury, which would mean the knife or the gun that you use to defend yourself. So be aware, if you're not just knife, if you're carrying around a knife that looks scary, be aware that if you ever are in a situation where you have to defend yourself, be prepared for that prosecutor to be kind of waving it around, to trying to scare the jury into convicting you. Definitely I recommend knowing how to use whatever you're using to defend yourself, whether that be mace, whether that be a gun, whether that be a knife. Knowing how to use it will help you during being attacked, like being, during defending yourself. If you don't know how to shoot and aim a gun when you're defending yourself, you won't do it effectively. But knowing when to pull that knife is very important, because that can be the difference between, if you get charged, that can be the difference between you going to prison or being acquitted.